What's the name of what we're here doing to this week?
Survival Weekend.
Survival Weekend. What's the beginning of the name?
Foundation.
Foundations, that's right. What's a foundation, you guys? What's a foundation? What? I heard someone building. What? I'm sure that's really great, and I want to hear the whole thing. What was it?
Platform of a building.
Platform of the building. Everything gets built on that foundation, right? The walls, the floors, the carpet, the roof, the electricity, your refrigerator is sitting on that, right? Okay, so everything is based on that foundation. And guess what? You have a foundation too, whether you know it or not. But Jesus said your foundation could be on sand, or it could be on stone, it could be on rock. So your foundation is going to be the thing that everything else is built on. It's going to decide what's important to you. It's going to decide how you make your decisions. It's going to decide how you judge the information that's coming in at you. So, there are two things. Remember sand and rock? There are two things that we can put our foundations on. We can put them on man's ideas, or we can put them on God's ideas. And you're at the age where you're trying to figure out which one's the right one to do. So, we're going to talk about that. What are man's ideas based on? No matter where you go in the world, man's ideas are based on, first of all, naturalism. The root of the word naturalism is natural. That means that the only thing that makes anything happen everywhere in the world is natural causes. Alright? This universe has nothing outside of it. And that's what man's ideas are based on. That nature is everything and nothing just happens, nothing happens because of someone making it happen. Along with that is uniformitarianism, which is a real mouthful, but it basically means uniform, right? So what they're saying is that all the processes that we see happening today, whether they're in animals or in rocks or stars or anything, has been happening at the same rate as long as it's been happening. But for us to have come from molecules, which is what most evolutionists believe, it has to take millions of years. It's not going to work without millions of years. You just need them. So what are God's ideas? Well, first of all, God is the creator, and the main difference here is that here is nature, and here is God. Okay, he's outside nature, and he is coming up with all these ideas, and he's making them happen. Which obviously is not the same as naturalism, is it? It's kind of the opposite. The next is, the Bible is true. Now, is the Bible a book of science? No, it's a book of history. But when it happens to mention things about science, it's true. When it happens to mention things about history, it's true. And it's really amazing. My mother gets a magazine, and has since it started coming out in the 1980s, called Biblical Archaeological Review. And they're always coming up with these discoveries. You know, they're archaeologists. They're digging the rocks, they're finding rocks. And they find things, and every time they find something, and a lot of times these archaeologists are trying to refute the Bible. They want the Bible to be wrong. And they find this thing, and it proves the Bible, once again, was telling the truth. That being said, there are only 6,000 years of history from the beginning to now. Now, we've kind of gotten used to this idea of millions of years, so 6,000 years seems like a really short time. It's not a short time. 6,000 years is a really long time. But how do we know it's 6,000 years? Well, based on the Bible is true, we go to the list of the patriarchs. And it starts with Adam. Who was the first man? Adam, right. There's nobody in front of him. So, all over the world, people are really interested in who their ancestors are. Particularly if you're a king. Because if you're a king, then part of your authority in being allowed to be king is that your dad was king, and his dad was king, and his dad was king. So they have what are called king's lists. But if you are lucky, the king's list will give you the age of the king at the time he became king, and the age he was when he died. They might not even give you how long he reigned. Okay? But sometimes it's just a list. And sometimes the lists, they don't tell you that this king was not actually the father of the next king. He was his uncle, or he was his brother, or something like that. And they certainly, and sometimes those kings are ruling at the same time, but they don't tell us that. And so, but the Bible is different. The Bible actually has this amazing thing called the Table of Nations. Well, that's not the Table of Nations, but they go through the ages of the patriarchs. They say, Adam was born, lived this long, had this son, and then lived this many more years, and then he died. And then this son lived this long, had a son when he was this age. And basically, it's an arithmetic problem. Any one of you could figure it out. And when, now that's like the pre-flood stuff, okay? And then the after-flood stuff, they kept that up until Abraham. Now, historically, we know when Abraham lived. So we stick all those things together, we get 6,000 years. Okay, so, all right, here are two things, our two lists, but which one is reliable? Well, I'm going to have a little quiz, okay? We're going to say, who said it first, man or the Bible? So, how about this one? Wash your hands. That's a big one, right? Everyone's been wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands all this year. But who said it first? Have you ever heard of Listerine? Mike? Yeah, we've got it sitting in our house. How about pasteurization? You look at your orange juice or your milk bottle and it says pasteurized. Those are actually named, those are processes and products that are named after people. Louis Pasteur was the father of microbiology. Now, before him, actually while he was still alive, people believed in something called spontaneous generation. And that means that something just, okay? So you leave meat sitting there and the next day in the heat and suddenly it has maggots. Spontaneous generation. Blech. No, but he figured out, he actually started looking at things through a microscope and he realized there were critters that were doing this and he invented the process of pasteurization. Because he said if you bring the temperature up, you will kill the microbes, then cool it off and you won't, theoretically you're not going to disturb your wine and your juice and your milk and all this kind of thing. So because of that, Joseph Lister, he was a surgeon and he went, bugs, let's do something about those bugs. Because if you went in to get surgery, it was a last resort because you were most likely going to die from infection. There was nothing else they could do. They couldn't fix you, so they're going to cut out whatever it is. But if you were lucky, you didn't die of infection. So the surgeons back in with Lister were very proud of their dirty gowns, blood and everything. It showed how experienced they were. And he was the one who said, can we please wash the gowns? And maybe like wash the instruments that are cutting into the next guy. And how about wash your hands before you do surgery? And then you go and you treat ladies who are having babies and then they die. You know, it was really awful. Literally hospitals were a place to go to die. And so he started this. All of these two men, basically, people started listening to the name. 1865. That's not so long ago. That's a civil war, right? It's not even 200 years ago. What does the Bible say? Moses in 1400 BC in Leviticus said, he who is to be cleansed shall wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and wash himself with water that he may be clean. And Jesus, 1,400 years later, then the scribes and the Pharisees came to Jesus saying, why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders when they do not wash their hands when they eat bread? So you were supposed to wash your hands 2,000 years ago. So, who said it first?
Bible.
The Bible. Okay. I got two more, but I don't know if I've got time. You willing to put off breakfast for a few more minutes? No. Okay, well the next one, unfortunately my computer does not have an HDMI port. I have these great visuals for you and I don't have them anymore. So we're going to skip to the next one. The next one is the stars cannot be counted. Now we know that the stars can't be counted, right? But when did we figure this out? Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to run down here to my next scripture. So, just so I've got it. Yes, this is a much better picture than the one I had to do. Okay, there we go. Can you count the stars? No. Now, if you go out on the hill, presuming that there's no clouds, and you look up, can you count the stars?
Yes.
Yes, you can. There are about 3,900 stars worldwide that you can actually see, and you can count them. But until about 1769, I think, when they had a telescope, all they could do was make those stars bigger. But in 1869, a man named Herschel built a 20-foot-long telescope, which is almost as wide as this room, long as this room is wide. And for the first time, they could see stars that you couldn't see with the naked eye. In the early 1800s, they gave up trying to put all the stars onto star charts because they couldn't fit them all. In 1995, they sent up the Hubble Space Telescope. Now, the Hubble Space Telescope is outside of our atmosphere, so you don't get the interference from clouds and haze and just like water in the air. And so for the first time, they could see to the end of the visible universe. You see that picture over there? Okay, that picture, if you know how big a postage stamp is, right? Okay, imagine you're holding, go ahead, hold a postage stamp at arm's length and hold it up against the sky. That is how much space that picture takes up. Do you know what all those little bright lights are? Galaxies. Now there are about 500,000 stars in our galaxy. And every one of those little dots, even the teeny tiny ones that are in the back, cloud at the back, every one of them is a galaxy. And we didn't find this out after 1995. Most of my children were born around that time, okay? So, when did God say it? Well, in Genesis 15, then God brought Abraham outside and said, look now toward heaven and count the stars if you are able to number them. Jeremiah, 1,000 years later, said, as the host of heaven cannot be numbered, nor the sand of the sea measured, so I will multiply the descendants of David. So who said it first? The Bible. That's right. Most of the time, when the Bible says something and the scientists look at it and go, oh, guess what? Science just hasn't caught up yet. We'll pat them on the head and say, you'll catch on. You'll catch on. But the fact is that in about 1910, Einstein and all of his fellow physicists and cosmologists and astronomers thought that the only universe was the Milky Way galaxy. That's all. By 1929, Edwin Hubble, for whom the Hubble telescope is named, figured out that there were stars that were moving away from us. They were moving away from us, and they was getting bigger and bigger. That was, what, 15 years? What we know is that man's body of knowledge changes every 20 years. So what you think is true today, what the scientists, the ones who are supposed to know it, think is true today, will not be true 20 years from now. Well, okay, great. But how do we know the Bible is true? I mean, okay, so it knows stuff. But how do we know it's true? Well, first of all, God says it's true. And that should be enough. Because it's God, you know. But for those people who don't accept that, is there still some more evidence that the Bible is true? Yes. So much so that there have been lawyers who are really good at finding, you know, cheeks in armor, have gone to the effort to study the Bible to see if it is true, using the laws of jurisprudence, and they wanted it not to be true, and they had to say that it was true. There is more evidence for the Bible than for any other books. Now, how many people wrote the Bible? Those of you who went to Awana. Say it loud.
40.
At least 40, probably more. And it took at least 16 100 years. Some people would say actually 3,000 years to write the Bible. And if there were any lies, if there were any mistakes, if there were any inconsistencies, they would have shown up. They would have shown up. There would be no way to hide them, right? Because this person writes this thing and this person writes this thing, and they're not necessarily talking to each other, right? Or maybe someone's really trying to make his story match the other guy's, you know, but when Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings, he had other people writing and telling him, you know, you made mistakes. This person does this thing here, but he says this other thing here. And he was his own book, and he couldn't even do it without mistakes. So God made it without mistakes. Now, how about compared to other books, like real stuff, you know, Julius Caesar, we know he lived, right? He wrote a book called The History of the Gallic Wars. This is probably the most important document about ancient Rome that we have. There are only 10 copies of this book in the original Latin, and the earliest one was written 1,000 years after Julius Caesar lived. And he wrote the book himself. How about the Bible? We're talking 5,964 copies of the Greek New Testament. And the oldest one was written only 130 years, or was copied only 130 years. Sorry, not 130 years, 130 AD, which is only about 60 years after the New Testament was finished. That, according to every historian, every lawyer, will constitute a really good piece of evidence. How about the Old Testament? Well, do you know they have said that if you didn't actually have a copy of the Old Testament, you could probably construct one from all the things that have been written about it. So you go to other people's writings and their journals and things, and you could stick it all together, and you could make the whole Old Testament. There is more evidence for it than for any other document in history. And it covers a lot more time than the New Testament, right? Who knows about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Okay. This is the discovery of the age. Not the year, not the century, not the millennium, the discovery of the age. Because it was written from about 300 BC to 100 AD. And in it, when they found it in 1959, there was an entire copy of the scroll of Isaiah. And Isaiah is a long book, and only 5% of everything that was in it had mistakes in it. And these mistakes are like, you made a comma instead of a period. Seriously, that was the only kind of mistake. They were like little copyist mistakes. So, but that's not the most important reason to believe that the Bible is true. Jesus had how many disciples? 12. Okay, Judas died, Paul replaced him. Those 12 disciples, every single one of them died because he believed the Bible was true. John, yes, John did not die, but he was 80 years old. He was sent to a prison colony for hard labor, and they thought he was going to die. It was just God that they closed down the prison colony and he shipped him home. Not only those 12 men believed that the Bible was true, but more people have died for believing in the Bible in the 20th century than have died for every other idea in the previous 2,000 years. So, when you are evaluating your foundation, you need to consider, do you want your foundation to be based on something that changes every 20 years? Or do you want your foundation to be something that people are willing to value?